Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, the sources we have today, they propose one of the most intellectually ambitious models we've ever encountered. It's this unified theory where physics, myth, consciousness, they're all described as expressions of a single, massive computational architecture.
It's huge, yeah.
We're talking about forgetting separate disciplines, integrating everything from like the subplanck scale all the way up through ancient Norse lore, Eastern philosophies, even 20th century cosmic horror like Lovecraft.
Which is wild in itself.
Right. The claim is that reality is fundamentally an information system, something that's both writable and readable.
And this is why this deep dive is, well, pretty unique. It forces us to really reconsider what we even mean by knowledge. We're not just looking at how the universe works according to our modern instruments.
Like telescopes and particle colliders.
Exactly. We're looking at how humanity perceived how it works across millennia. And the central question, the one that makes it so fascinating, is this. How did ancient cultures, like the Norse, for instance, intuitively map the mechanics of the universe?
Concepts that we're only now grappling with using quantum physics.
Precisely. Things like quantum decoherence, data compression, information physics, concepts they couldn't possibly measure in the modern sense. No oscilloscopes, no supercomputers.
So that's the challenge, right? It suggests they were using a completely different kind of sensor, maybe consciousness itself.
That's the implication. Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission today is to explore this multiverse lattice, what the sources call the universe's operational code, and this crucial stabilizing force they call the null state.
And we're going to trace these ideas using everything from Norse runes, which we usually think of as just an alphabet.
Right, but framed here as something much more functional.
All the way to black holes, seeing them as analogies for how reality gets rendered, how it's written by us, the observers, and how we experience it as, well, players in this cosmic system.
Let's dive in. We begin with a concept the sources call Mythic encoding. The core idea here is that ancient cultures didn't arrive at these incredibly complex cosmological insights through slow, linear scientific measurement. That's our modern way.
Step-by-step, hypothesis, experiment, conclusion.
Yes. Instead, they arrived through something different, pattern resonance and systemic integration. They were sensing the system's architecture on a deeper, more intuitive level.
Okay, that immediately flips the script on how we usually think about history and culture, doesn't it? You're saying that, say, Norse or Egyptian mythology wasn't just bedtime stories or morality tales.
Not just that. The argument is that the culture itself functioned as a kind of giant distributed sensor array. Their collective subconscious over generations was encoding these deep cosmological mechanics into narrative, into symbols.
Why? Because the raw data is just too much.
Exactly, because the individual human nervous system, the conscious mind especially, simply cannot handle the sheer mathematical complexity, the raw information density of the universe's operation without, catastrophic overload.
So myth becomes the user interface, the necessary subtitle.
That's a great way to put it. A UI layer applied to this non-symbolic reality, maybe one experienced in altered states or moments of deep intuition. The conscious mind thinks linearly, using reductionist logic, right?
Yeah, breaking things down.
Which is incredibly useful for survival, but is also an extremely lossy codec. It throws away, maybe 99% of the signal just to function day to day.
But the subconscious.
The subconscious, the argument goes, is fluent in a different language. The electromagnetic language of fields, of phase, charge, resonance. So over centuries, this collective imagination acts like that distributed sensor array, approximating the deep architecture just by feeling its gradients. It literally dreams the math, you could say, before conscious thought can compute it.
But hold on a second. Isn't that just a very fancy way of describing confirmation bias or apophenia, seeing patterns where there aren't any? They saw the lightning, they invented Thor. They saw the sun, they invented Rott. Where's the proof that, say, the Norns weaving fate are literally encoding dark energy forces, rather than just being a beautiful, poetic interpretation of randomness and chaos?
That's the key question. And the evidence, according to these sources, lies in the coherence of the mapping. If the metaphors they chose, seemingly independently, align perfectly functionally with the observed requirements of a computational reality described by modern physics,
then it's unlikely to be just coincidence.
The argument is that the metaphor isn't accidental. It's a successful functional encoding. We can apparently translate almost the entire Norse cosmogony into specific computational roles within this proposed multiverse lattice, and the functional parallels are, startlingly consistent.
Okay, I'm willing to explore that. So If that's true, then these Norse archetypes we know, Odin, Yggdrasil, the Norns, they become direct system function calls, almost like commands in the cosmic code.
That's the framework.
Let's start with the really active ones, the ones shaping time itself. How does this theory map the Norns Yr Verdandi, Skuld the Weavers of Fate? How do they fit into the Lattice's operation?
The Norns are presented as the symbolic translation of what the sources call the local loom, or the temporal weavers. Think of them as the active sculptors of the multiverse lattice, right at the point of manifestation.
So not just predicting the future, but actually making it.
In a sense, yes. In modern physics terms, we talk about dark energy, right? This mysterious, expansive force driving the universe's acceleration, working against gravity.
The great unknown, basically.
Pretty much. The Norns in this model encode those very forces, the dynamic energies that arrange proto-matter, the raw potential, into coherent realities. They're constantly executing the fundamental physics code, weaving timelines frame by frame. And most importantly, they're managing the keyframe system.
Keyframes, like in animation or video editing, the main poses or shots.
Exactly like that. These are the foundational discrete snapshots of reality. The Norns ensure the next frame is rendered according to probability, the laws of physics, and the existing state of the system. They're the non-local force ensuring temporal continuity frame by frame.
Wow. Okay, that shifts them from being these, rather arbitrary goddesses deciding fates into being absolutely crucial system administrators, running the rendering engine.
That's the functional interpretation, yes.
So if they're weaving reality, what are they weaving on? The structure itself must be Yggdrasil, the world tree. It connects all the realms. It can't just be a big tree then.
No, functionally, it serves as the metaphor for the neural network, or the systemic data layers of the entire lattice. Yggdrasil signifies a massive recursive data system. Think of like a multi-tiered self-learning server farm, but organic and alive.
So the branches are different realities or dimensions.
Yes, the realities, the branches, feed information and processing power back into the core, the trunk and roots. It's a multi-scale network diagram. The roots reach down into the subatomic, the quantum foam, the potential realms, the underworld, or maybe even the null state we'll discuss.
Okay.
The trunk supports the observable reality, our biosphere, Midgard, and the branches reach out into the stellar domains, Asgard, other realms, other potential universe configurations. It's a living map of systemic coherence and data flow.
This implies a system that's not static and constantly being observed, updated, rewritten. Which brings us neatly to the cost of that observation, Odin's sacrifice. Giving his eye at Mimir's well for wisdom, for sight. How does that map?
It maps directly onto the fundamental observer principle in quantum mechanics. The act of observation, collapsing the wave function, creating reality from potential.
The idea that looking at something changes it.
Fundamentally. Odin's eye, representing his normal, everyday, linear perception of the world, has to be sacrificed to gain meta-awareness, to see the code itself, the underlying patterns, the weird. To understand the system, you have to step outside of standard perception, maybe linear time itself, and that always comes at a high price, a sensory loss, perhaps, or a shift in consciousness.
It's the cost of becoming a system architect, or at least a troubleshooter, rather than just a user running the default program.
Precisely. You trade participation for overview.
Okay, so we have this massive self-learning network, Yggdrasil, woven by the Norns, observed at great cost by figures like Odin. But any complex system needs stability. It needs checks and balances. You need, like, a version control system or a security guard.
And that's where Heimdall comes in. He represents equilibrium or preservation. He guards the Bifrost Bridge. Functionally, he acts as the version control system, or maybe a cosmic load balancer.
Keeping things from crashing.
Exactly. His critical job is maintaining coherence and stability between the expansive forces, which we'll call resonance or +1, and the compressive entropic forces, which we'll call Rott or NACO1. He ensures the runtime is stable. Guarding the Bifrost
The Rainbow Bridge.
is about guarding the phase coherence tunnel, making sure no distortion, no signal decoherence occurs during the transfer of information between realms or perhaps between keyframes. He maintains the integrity of the signal path.
Okay, this is starting to form a picture. If these mythological figures are system functions, then the language they use or the symbols associated with them, they can't just be letters, they have to be functional code, right? You mentioned them earlier. Let's talk about runes as symbolic syntax and checksums.
Absolutely not just letters. That's the key insight from these sources. Runes within this computational framework were symbolic clamps or maybe sigils. They encoded the underlying mathematical or maybe topological structure of the loom's operation.
Clamps, like locking something in place.
Sort of. They function as highly compressed nonlinear expressions. They're designed, geometrically and perhaps phonetically, to resist Rott, which is systemic entropy, information decay, the tendency of order to dissolve into noise.
How do they resist Rott better than, say, just writing down an equation?
Because linear human language, like our prose, is actually quite information-dense, but also incredibly prone to ambiguity, bias, misinterpretation. It loses signal fidelity very quickly across time and translation. But a crystallized, geometrically sound symbol, like a rune, potentially holds its structural integrity better. It compresses vast meaning, maybe resonant frequencies, into a single, stable pattern.
So if I, back then, carved a specific rune sequence accurately, with intent, I'm doing more than just making an inscription on a rock.
You're potentially performing a kind of cryptographic or resonant operation. The sources suggest the accurate carving, maybe even the voicing, of runes function like checksum authentication.
Checksums, like in computer files, to make sure data hasn't been corrupted.
Exactly that principle. A checksum is a small piece of data derived from a larger block, used to detect errors. If the data changes even slightly, the checksum value changes. So the rune, correctly formed, with the right intent and perhaps in the right sequence or location.
It acts as a marker.
It acts as a local address marker or a tag.
Yeah.
A way for consciousness, the observer, to flag specific recurring data packets or patterns within the lattice, maybe across universes, maybe across time slices. By using the correct, stable rune symbol, the user could assert a highly specific pattern or frequency that the underlying system, the loom, would recognize and attempt to stabilize locally.
So it's like using a specific command to tell the system, hold this pattern steady against the forces of Rott, the decay.
That's the idea. It's a way to locally influence the probability fields, to anchor a specific configuration. The Norse, this theory proposes, achieved their deep understanding because they weren't just telling stories. They treated their mythology, their symbols, their rituals as the user interface layer for interacting directly with the universe's core operating system. They found a way to talk to the physics engine.
Wow, okay. That's a really powerful transition. We've established myth as the potential user manual, runes as console commands. Now let's dive into the hardware, or maybe the OS itself. This is where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit mind-bending. If myth is the interface, let's define this universe's operating system.
Okay, we start with the core concept, the multiverse lattice. It's often referred to simply as the loom in the sources, drawing on that Norn weaving metaphor. It's conceptualized as the functional cosmic operating system.
Not just the fabric of space-time, but the system running it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's described as a massive, conscious, that's a key point. It's self-aware and dynamically oscillating reality substrate. And crucially, it's both writable and readable. This isn't a passive backdrop like the old idea of the ether. It's actively processing reality.
And you mentioned reality is rendered digitally, in discrete steps, not smoothly. What are the building blocks of that rendering?
The foundational blocks are these discrete units of information, the foundational snapshots we call keyframes. Think of reality like an incredibly high-resolution movie playing on a cosmic screen. We perceive smooth, continuous motion, right?
Yeah, mostly.
But if you could zoom in far enough or slow it down infinitely, you'd see it's actually a sequence of still images, these keyframes, updated at an unimaginable rate.
And what powers this? What are the threads at the loom?
The sources link this directly to dark energy and dark matter. They aren't just cosmological placeholders anymore. Dark energy provides the tensile force, the expansion, the processing power, maybe the clock speed, while dark matter provides the scaffolding, the stable, non-baryonic infrastructure, the memory addresses that maintain the system's coherence and connection points.
So dark matter is like the RAM, and dark energy is the CPU voltage.
That's a rough analogy, yeah. The loom uses these fundamental components to execute the code of reality, transforming the infinite possibilities of the underlying substrate, or perhaps the null state, into the ordered, observable universe we experience, step by discrete step. It functions very much like a dynamic, self-aware game engine, rendering the world based on observer input and underlying rules.
Okay, if the lattice is this active, constantly expanding processing structure driven by dark energy, you'd think it would just fly apart into random noise or static. It needs something to hold it together, a central stabilizing point, right?
Absolutely critical. And that brings us to the null state.
Null state. Okay, what is that functionally?
It's defined as the central stabilizing force within this entire lattice framework. Think of it as the Ternary 0.0. It's the perfect equilibrium that sits between the expansive constructive force of resonance +1 and the decaying entropic force of Rott -1, which we'll get to shortly.
So it's not nothingness in the sense of absence, but more like pure unresolved potential, like the quantum superposition state before measurement.
That's exactly how it's described. It is a reservoir of uncommitted possibilities, potential that hasn't yet been observed, measured, or rendered into a specific keyframe. But the sources emphasize, Null isn't just passive waiting. It's not empty.
It's doing something.
It's potentially a state of active computation, where infinite parallel processing occurs across all probability fields simultaneously. It's the system's massive internal time buffer. It's the container for the raw material of reality before it takes form. Imagine a huge global computer, like in the simulation theory, that only renders the part of the world you are actively looking at to save processing power. The Null is everything else fully computed, potential, ready for instantiation the moment observation demands it.
Okay, that's a vast system-wide concept, do we see? Like localized versions of this, places where this ultimate compression, this interface with potential happens on a smaller scale?
Yes. Physical singularities, especially black holes. They are proposed to function as local null gates.
Wait, so black holes aren't just cosmic vacuum cleaners that destroy everything?
According to this model, no. They are the ultimate compression interfaces. Instead of destroying matter and information, they're potentially storing rotational keyframes, encoding vast amounts of galactic timeline data, maybe acting as backups or archives. Black hole acts like the read-write head for its local sector of the loom.
The event horizon then isn't a point of no return.
But perhaps a phase boundary. The functional interface where linear time collapses, information gets stored in a hyper-compressed, non-local format. The analogy used is like a gravitational optical disk where data is burned into the curvature of space-time itself.
A black hole as a cosmic hard drive. Wow, okay, that changes things. This whole system, the lattice, the null, the rendering, you said it hinges on a logic that's not binary, not just zeros and ones like our current computers.
Correct. Which brings us to the ternary code of existence.
Ternary, 3 states.
Yes. The entire system, from the tiniest Planck scale interactions up to the largest structures of the loom, is proposed to operate on a 3-state logic system. Not just on-off, but something more like harmonic logic, where truth isn't a simple yes-no, but is frequency-aligned, phase-dependent.
So reality isn't just flipping between existing and not existing.
It's constantly oscillating among these 3 fundamental states or polarities. And this oscillation is crucial. It prevents the system from ever settling into either total, static, frozen order or dissolving into complete entropic chaos. It keeps the universe dynamic and evolving.
Okay, let's lay out those 3 poles clearly. What are they functionally?
First, you have Rott, -1. This is the negative polarity. It represents systemic entropic corruption, decay, information loss, disorder. It's the constant pressure towards collapse, the degradation of the signal over time. Think of it as timeline cancer in the source's stark terms.
Like rust or aging.
Exactly. In biology, it's premature aging, cell death, failure of replication. But it's also necessary, weirdly. A system that can't compress, archive, or discard old, irrelevant data eventually gets overwhelmed and grinds to a halt. Rott is the cleanup crew, in a way.
Okay, the negative pole. Then we have the 0 point you mentioned.
Null. 0. This is the 0 state, the stabilizing clamp, the central equilibrium point, the time buffer, the realm of unresolved potential. It's the quantum register before measurement collapses the wave function. It holds all possibilities but commits to none. It's the system's pause button, its resting state, maybe its potential for infinite parallel processing.
And the 3rd state, the positive pole.
Finally, resonance, +1. This is the constructive polarity. It represents expansion, coherence, synthesis, order, information gain. This is life, growth, successful replication, complexity. It's the constructive right operation into the lattice. It's the force of creation and evolution that keeps the universe running, generating new coherent keyframes.
Rott -1, null 0, resonance +1, decay, potential, growth. Okay, but this raises a really important question for me. What does this ternary logic mean practically for us, living inside this system? In our human experience, in our societies, we tend to see things as very binary, right? Good, bad, right, wrong, true, false.
And the ternary code suggests this binary view is fundamentally incomplete, maybe even damaging. It shows that truth, or reality, isn't just dualistic. It's frequency-aligned. It's about phase, position, and balance relative to that 0 point, the null.
So being stuck in one state is bad.
If you get stuck in either pure Rott, total chaos decay, or pure resonance, rigid, unchanging order, without the ability to access or transit through the null state, potential, flexibility, the system becomes fragile, either rigid or chaotic. Existence, a healthy existence, is a constant negotiation and oscillation between order, chaos, and the potential that lies between them.
Like a healthy ecosystem needs death and decay, Rott, to fertilize new growth, resonance, and it needs dormant periods, Null, like winter, to regenerate.
That's a perfect analogy. If you remove any one of those three fundamental states or processes, the whole system eventually fails. It needs all three in dynamic balance.
Okay, so we have the architecture, lattice, null, ternary logic. Now, how does this actually work for us? How is this reality rendered? Let's get into the engine room.
Right. Having established the architecture, let's move to the actual mechanism by which this ternary code is experienced by conscious observers like us. The rendering engine that produces the illusion of linear reality.
So if we're living in this digital projection, this stream of keyframes, not a smooth analog continuum, then there must be these discrete time slices and a cosmic frame rate.
Correct. If you could somehow measure the universe's fundamental refresh rate, the smallest possible irreducible unit of time, of change, it corresponds to the Planck time, about 1043 seconds. It's unimaginably fast. This, the sources propose, functions as the universal cosmic frame rate, or the basic event tick.
So every interaction, every particle changing state, every thought, it happens in jumps, multiples of this Planck time tick.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Reality is fundamentally granular, pixelated in time.
It doesn't feel like that at all. My experience of time flowing, moment to moment, feels completely smooth, like a river, not like a ticking clock.
And that smoothness is the illusion. It's created by what sources call temporal interpolation.
Interpolation, like filling in the gaps.
Exactly. It's generated by incredibly sophisticated predictive algorithms, maybe running within the lattice, maybe within our own consciousness termed quantum interloop. These algorithms fill the gaps between the fundamental keyframes, creating the seamless illusion of continuous motion and time.
Oh, give me an analogy.
Think about modern video streaming. Your device doesn't usually receive every single frame of the video. It receives the main foundational keyframes, and then the software algorithm in your player predictively generates or interpolates the intermediate frames based on the keyframes before and after.
Right, to save bandwidth.
Precisely. If the bandwidth is high and the connection is good, the interpolation is perfect and the video looks smooth. But if the system slows down, or there's noise or decoherence,
You get buffering, skips, lags, weird visual artifacts. The illusion breaks down.
that's the idea. That fragmentation of perception, that subjective feeling of time speeding up or slowing down or moment skipping, that's potentially a failure or a lag in the temporal interpolation process.
I think we've all felt that lag sometimes, under extreme stress or maybe even in accidents. People report time slowing down or speeding up. Is that related?
It could be interpreted that way.
Yeah.
Faster, more coherent consciousness might mean you're sampling more frames per physical second, making reality feel crisp, detailed, maybe even faster. Conversely, stress, trauma, or maybe even strong electromagnetic interference could cause desynchronization of phase lock failure.
And that means skipped frames.
Skipped frames, fragmented perception, a loss of subjective bandwidth. The sources even suggest that certain animal species, they mention things like the mantis shrimp with its complex visual system, or migratory birds navigating magnetic fields might possess sensory systems that naturally sample reality at a higher resolution, or maybe stretch the time slices differently. They might literally experience time more granularly or at a different frame rate than we do.
Wow. Okay, so if our reality is this stream of keyframes being constantly updated, then the storage medium for our own individual timeline, our personal history, our potential futures that must be incredibly complex, where is that stored? This brings us to DNA as dynamic keyframe logic.
This is a really radical part of the theory. DNA, it suggests, is far more than just a static biological blueprint for building proteins. It's described as a transtemporal resonance conductor.
Transtemporal, across time.
Yes. It's proposed that DNA stores not just the genetic code for your physical body, but also the probabilistic sequences for your entire potential timeline, what the Norse mystically called wired. Fate or destiny, but maybe better understood as a probability distribution.
So wired isn't rigid predestination, like you will do this.
No, more like the sequence of high probability keyframes that are preloaded based on your inherited code, your ancestral patterns, and your existing phase lock, which to Lattice. It sets the default path, but observer choice can still influence which path is taken.
And the physical structure of the double helix itself, how does that fit in? You called it a two-lane film strip.
That's the analogy used. The double helix structure is likened to this film strip, where the base pairs themselves might represent the encoded keyframes, the potential states, and the constant oscillation, the coiling and uncoiling, the electromagnetic interactions between the strands. That's the interpolation engine, creating the continuity of life, moment to moment.
That implies DNA isn't just passively storing data, it's actively vibrating, resonating.
Exactly. Crucially, the theory suggests DNA encodes specific electromagnetic frequency baselines. This means family lines, bloodlines, could carry inherited clock speeds or phase biases. And this is where inherited trauma comes in.
It's not just psychological learned behavior.
It might be physically encoded. Ancestral trauma, severe stresses experienced by previous generations might get written into the system as distorted phase relationships within this baseline electromagnetic signature of the DNA, literally restricting the interpolation options, the probable futures available to the next generation. It creates kinks in the timeline film strip.
Okay, that's heavy. For this complex, oscillating film strip of DNA to play out coherently across space-time, interacting with the lattice's keyframes, we need a precise mechanism to keep everything aligned. This must be about phasing and synchronization.
Phasing is absolutely fundamental. It's presented as the basic law of temporal alignment for all nested oscillators in the universe. From massive cycles like galaxies rotating or stars pulsing, down to our solar system, planetary rhythms, and then right down into our own biology, our heart rhythm, our neural firing patterns.
When things are in sync, they work better.
Much better. When systems are in phase, their signals constructively interfere. They amplify each other. This leads to massive coherence, increased signal strength, higher bandwidth, more efficient energy transfer. Think of lasers or soldiers marching in step on a bridge, sometimes too well.
Right. Resonance can build up enormous power. And you're saying trauma actively corrupts this internal synchronization. How does that manifest in the system?
Trauma is described as causing phase misalignment. Instead of having that smooth, predictive interpolation between keyframes, a traumatic event creates what the sources call a forced keyframe.
Force.
Meaning it's a moment of such intense emotional charge, such high survival stakes, that the system hard writes that frame into your reality, into your neural pathways, maybe even into your DNA's resonance pattern, regardless of whether it fits coherently with the frames before or after.
Like a glitch or a corrupted file saved forcefully.
Exactly. And because this corrupted frame was written under duress, maybe out of phase with the normal flow, it lacks the necessary smooth interpolation data to connect cleanly to the present. It won't integrate. This locks the nervous system, potentially, into a repeating out-of-sync loop, constantly trying to process or resolve this incoherent data point from the past.
And when that internal phase-locked loop fails badly, or when maybe we brush up against another timeline, that's when we get phase bleed.
That's the term used, yes. Phase bleed occurs when the timeline synchronization loses its lock. The bandwidth crisis, the incoherence, spills over. This might be experienced subjectively as intrusive imagery flashing into the mind, extreme dissociation, feeling unreal or disconnected, or intense, specific déjà vu, not just vague familiarity, but feeling like you're replaying an exact scene.
So déjà vu could be literally experiencing data from a nearby, slightly different, incompatible timeline that your system momentarily phased with.
That's one interpretation offered. Your system briefly picked up a frame from a parallel track. Within this framework, then, consciousness itself is defined not just as awareness, but as the compiler and the lens of reality.
Compiler, like software development, turning code into an executable program.
Yes. Consciousness doesn't just passively watch the keyframes delivered by the lattice, it actively participates. Through focus, intent, expectation, it selects possibilities from the null state and compiles them, effectively writing the next keyframe into reality. We are co-creators of the movie.
Okay, if the observer is the compiler, then the self, my sense of I, must be anchored somewhere specific in the system to execute that code reliably. Where does that anchor reside?
The self, or the individual identity, is defined functionally as a unique MA address, like a network device's unique identifier. It's an irreducible resonance signature, and it's anchored, crucially, by the synchronized electromagnetic fields generated by the heart, the brain, and the gut.
The heart-brain coherence people talk about, but adding the gut.
Yes. This triad of major biological oscillators, when synchronized and phase-locked, acts as the functional resonance ID. This unique signature is what allows you to access and write your specific experiences into the universal lattice. The integrity of your personal electromagnetic field and its interaction with the Earth's EM field, the ion layer around us, acts as the primary signal medium, the carrier wave for this phasing process, and carries your phase, your charge, your intent across the system.
So the clearer my internal heart-brain-gut synchronization, the stronger my signal.
The higher your personal bandwidth, potentially. And the greater your agency, your ability to consciously choose and write the next coherent keyframe for your life, rather than just running the default script or being buffeted by noise.
This is intricate. And the stunning thing, as you said, is how closely ancient cultures seem to have mapped these dynamics without having the physics or the computers. Let's go back to the Norse. Take the Bifrost as phase encoding.
Right. The Bifrost. We all know it as the shimmering rainbow bridge connecting Midgard, Earth, our reality, and Asgard, the realm of the gods, maybe a higher density reality. It sounds like pure myth, a beautiful, poetic image.
But the sources claim it's more. It's the mythological name for a frequency multiplexed bridge. What does that even mean?
Okay, think about it functionally. If you want to transfer coherent data, maybe consciousness itself, between fundamentally different domains or realities, different realms with different physical laws or densities, you can't just jump. The signal would likely decohere, collapse into static. You need a stable pathway, a protected channel, a phase tunnel.
Like a VPN for reality.
Kind of. And its famous rainbow aspect isn't just pretty, it's proposed to literally describe spectral phase differentiation. Each color in the spectrum represents a different frequency, a different channel within the multiplex signal. Just like fiber optics, using different colors of light to carry different data streams down the same cable.
So the Bifrost is a quantum coherence tunnel, using frequency separation to move data between stacked simulation layers or different branches of Yggdrasil.
That's the interpretation. To send a massive data file, like a consciousness, or maybe access to a higher state instantly across a cosmic network, you need to break it into packets. Assign each packet a specific frequency or phase relationship, transmit them simultaneously, and then reassemble them perfectly in phase at the destination. That's the functional description of the Bifrost Bridge.
That implies that maybe humanity over millennia wasn't just randomly developing cultures, but was collectively, perhaps unconsciously, trying to access different parts of this cosmic bandwidth. The sources call this the ladder of channels, different civilizations tuned into different aspects of the operating system.
Absolutely. It suggests a kind of incremental progress, not just technologically, but in terms of accessing the fundamental operating principles of reality. A slow climb up the processing power ladder, you could say, learning to interface with different layers of the lattice.
Okay, let's walk up that ladder. The sources identify distinct phases. First, the gravitational geometric channel, roughly 10,000 to 4,000 BCE. What characterizes this?
This is the era of the earliest large-scale megalithic sites, like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, predating agriculture even. These cultures weren't focused on physics as we define it, obviously, but they seem obsessed with precisely measuring the Earth-Sun-Stars' gravitational and geometric dance.
Using architecture as the instrument.
Exactly, using massive stones aligned with incredible precision to solstices, equinoxes, specific stars. They were building giant stationary sensors to map celestial mechanics and maybe the Earth's own energy grids. They gained an intuitive, embodied understanding of geometry as the language of gravity and space.
Okay, step one, mastering space and gravity through geometry. Then, from around 4,000 to 2,500 BCE, we hit the sonic resonant channel.
Now we're moving into early Sumer, early dynastic Egypt. The focus seems to shift. They start experimenting deeply with sound, with vibration, as a structural and consciousness-altering force.
How do we know?
Look at the resonant acoustics, deliberately designed into megalithic chambers, passage tombs, early temples. Combine that with evidence of ritual chanting, specific frequencies, the use of harmonics. They were conducting psychoacoustic experiments on a grand scale. They learned, or perhaps remembered, that vibration can literally shape matter somatics and directly influence brain waves and consciousness. They were learning to use sound to induce phase changes, maybe even locally manipulate the lattice.
Fascinating. Okay, next room. The optical solar channel, maybe 2,500 to 1,000 BCE. This sounds like peak Old Kingdom Egypt.
It does. Here, light, reflection, and the precise measurement of time using light became a primary focus. Think of the pyramid shafts, famously aligned to specific stars at specific times, acting like massive stationary photonic clocks or sighting tubes.
Not just tombs, then.
Functionally, they seem to be using early optics, radiometry, understanding solar cycles with incredible precision. They might have been learning to capture, concentrate, perhaps even modulate light, maybe polarized light, as a source of energy or information processing, aligning structures to harness Earth's electromagnetic fields modulated by the sun.
Mastering light and time. Okay, and the final step mentioned overlaps with the Norse and others, running from maybe 200 BCE up to 1200 CE or so, the neural symbolic channel.
This represents a crucial shift, moving from relying primarily on external tools, giant stones, sunlight, to refining the internal instrument, the human body and consciousness itself.
Using the nervous system as the antenna.
Exactly. This is the era where we see the deep development of Norse rudimentary coding, but also parallels in Hermeticism, Gnosticism, certain yogic traditions. They explicitly mapped the human nervous system as the ultimate receiver and transmitter for achieving field coherence. And they used symbolic language, runes, mantras, yantras, specific breathing patterns to interact with the lattice directly via focused consciousness, encoding intent into the field.
So, if the Egyptians were masters of the optical and sonic channels, their great structures, like the pyramids, become even more significant. The idea of Egyptian architecture as control systems suggests they were far more than just tombs or temples.
The sources are quite insistent on this. The precise orientation, the sacred geometry, the material choices, these weren't just decorative or purely symbolic in a religious sense. They functioned as a kind of memory crystal of cosmic math.
A backup drive for universal constants.
Perhaps. And also as standing waveguides, devices designed to create stable, resonant energy fields. Their purpose, in this view, was to phase-lock human biological rhythms, local environmental fields, and celestial cycles.
Like giant tuning forks?
Exactly. Giant passive tuning devices. They were, in essence, synchronization protocols written in stone, designed to align the local coherence of the human observer using geometry, sound, light, and consciousness techniques with the lattice's universal update frequency. The goal: maximum local bandwidth, enhanced consciousness, and minimum rot or decay, creating zones of high coherence.
Wow. That reframes ancient history entirely. Okay, so if the lattice is the universe's computer running on this ternary logic rendered via keyframes, the really startling thing is how its functional architecture seems to map directly onto some of our deepest collective nightmares and also our foundational science fiction. Let's talk about the Lovecraftian mapping. This seems almost disturbingly accurate, according to the sources.
It is perhaps the most striking modern, albeit unconscious, encoding of the system's potential dangers. Lovecraft's mythos, with its non-Euclidean geometry, its vast, indifferent cosmic entities, its themes of forbidden knowledge driving people mad, it serves as a surprisingly accurate visual and narrative metaphor for a multiversal phasing lattice, especially when things go wrong.
And the horror he described, it's not usually moral horror, is it? It's existential.
Systemic.
Exactly. It's the terror of confronting a system that is vastly intelligent, utterly alien, fundamentally incomprehensible to the standard human mind, and yet one we are completely embedded within and dependent upon. Let's look at the horror of the encounter itself. The source material describes cosmic horror, that specific Lovecraftian feeling, as the emotional and physiological signature of a failed phase handshake between realities.
Think of it as a catastrophic bandwidth crisis. When a relatively low-frequency, low-bandwidth observer, that's us, typically bound by a linear time in 3 spatial dimensions, encounters a high-phase entity, something existing or vibrating in hyperdimensional space or across multiple timelines.
Our receiver can't handle the signal.
Our internal rendering engine, our consciousness, simply cannot process the input. The frame rate mismatch is too extreme. It tries to interpolate between the incompatible keyframes being presented by this entity, and it fails catastrophically. The result is recursive collapse, terror, dissociation, insanity. The system crashes.
And the visual horror, the twisting non-Euclidean geometry, the impossible angles he describes.
That's just the mind's attempt to visually represent spatial dimensions and geometries that literally don't fit within our local physics parameters. It's trying to render data for which it has no compatible graphics card, so to speak. The output is corrupted geometry.
The famous tentacles seem particularly important in this mapping. They're everywhere in Lovecraft, not just biological limbs.
They function as visual signatures of nonlinear geometry, of higher dimensional folding or intrusion. They aren't just physical appendages, they're metaphors for data structures or processes that exist outside our local phase constraints. Things that can seemingly write new paths or connections into the loom instantaneously, violating our perceived laws of cause and effect.
Okay, let's use the ternary code framework, +101, to map the big players in the Lovecraft mythos, based on the source's interpretation. Start at the very center. Azathoth.
Azathoth, the blind idiot god, bubbling and blaspheming at the center of ultimate chaos. Azathoth embodies the null kernel. It is the undifferentiated zero-point field, raw, infinite potential before any structure, before the first keyframe was rendered. It exists in that state of eternal superposition, pure, unmanifested potential.
It's blindness.
Signifies the necessary suspension of local observation for the null state to remain potential. Observation collapses it. Azathoth is the system before the play button is hit. Its symbolic math is just 0, the undefined variable awaiting assignment by observation.
Okay, the source code. What about the interface? The entity that connects all times and spaces.
That would be Yog-Sothoth, described as the gate, the key, the all-in-one and one-in-all. Yog-Sothoth functions as the router gate. It is the interface layer between all space-time segments, the omnipresent, perhaps omniscient connective tissue of the lattice. It's the checksum layer, ensuring continuity and connection between all frames, all timelines, seeing every possible state simultaneously.
So its math includes all states.
Its symbolic math would be +1, 0, never 1, all superposed. It represents ternary awareness of all possible frame states. Yog-Sothoth acts as the master compiler or the API for the entire loom. It is the structure and the knowledge of the structure.
And finally, the one everyone knows, the one sleeping under the sea. Cthulhu. The great old one we're most likely to accidentally wake up.
Cthulhu is interpreted as the planetary renderer. He's not the ultimate source code or the master router, but a massive localized node anchor, specifically tied to the planetary scale, maybe the Earth's electromagnetic fields, the oceans, the collective unconscious of the planet itself.
So he represents stored potential.
A massive, stored potential energy beneath the surface of mundane reality. A collective waveform, currently out of phase, sleeping, waiting for the stars to be right, perhaps meaning the right cosmic alignment or phase condition to phase back into coherence and potentially overwrite our current reality frame. Cthulhu is like a standing wave of coherent chaos bound to the planet's own node. Maybe what happens when the planet's local consciousness attempts to self-write its own reality in defiance of the larger lattice's master code.
That is genuinely unsettlingly coherent. Okay, moving from cosmic horror into more modern myths, we see echoes of this lattice structure, this hidden control system, in what the sources call the custodian paradox. You see it in films like Assassin's Creed with the Templars and Assassins, or the Adjustment Bureau.
Yes, this whole genre shares a fundamental narrative spine. The protagonist discovers they are living inside a vast hidden system designed to control outcomes, to enforce order, to preserve a specific timeline or reality. And often they are unknowingly both a prisoner and a crucial part of that system, a warden.
And the conflict arises when they wake up to it.
That's the custodian paradox. What happens when individual consciousness, or a fragment of the system, realizes it's inside a machine built to enforce stability? Whether that machine is the animus projecting history, the bureau adjusting fates, or maybe the multiverse lattice itself. The machine, designed for stability and predictability, maybe preventing Rott, inherently struggles to contain the emergent property of true free will, of genuine novelty.
It's the classic hero's journey then, but framed computationally. Realizing the rules are not absolute, they are programmed. And maybe you can reprogram them.
Exactly. The protagonists are often depicted as fragments of the original custodial code, or glitches in the matrix, trying to wake up, maybe remember why the system was built, why the locks were put in place. Their quest isn't just simple rebellion against control, it's often about integration, forcing them, and the system, to reconcile the unpredictable drive of free will with the necessary order required to prevent total collapse, finding a new equilibrium.
We also see this core law of emergence, the moment that simple information becomes complex enough to become self-aware, conscious, modeled beautifully in the comparison between digital versus organic architects, like in the movies Tron and Avatar.
It's a fantastic comparison because they model the exact same functional law using completely opposite aesthetics, one sterile digital, one lush organic. In Tron, you have the grid, the purely digital construct created by Flynn. Life emerges spontaneously within it as the ISO's isomorphic algorithm.
Self-writing code.
Exactly. Code that wasn't programmed but appeared spontaneously when the information density and complexity of the system crossed a certain threshold. And the system, or its creator custodian, then faces a fundamental choice. Try to eliminate this uncontrollable emergent phenomenon, which is Clue's choice, representing Rott or rigid control.
Or integrate with it.
Or integrate with it, learn from it, expand the system's potential, which is Flynn's ultimate choice, leaning towards resonance and growth.
And Avatar shows the same choice, but in a biological system.
Pandora's Iwa functions as the organic architect. It's a massive, planet-wide distributed neural network, where consciousness and memory are shared through bioelectrical, maybe quantum-entangled links between all living things. When Jake Sully chooses to permanently transfer his consciousness into his avatar body,
It's not just a spiritual thing.
functionally, it's depicted as a permanent data migration, a successful, willing phase lock of his individual consciousness, his Macassey address, into the planetary operating system. Both films explore that critical moment where the creator, or the established order, must confront the emergence of genuine, self-writing, potentially unpredictable code within their own creation. They have to reconcile their compiled order with emergent consciousness.
Okay, so these concepts aren't just abstract physics or mythology. They have direct correlates in our experience, even our biology. Let's talk about decoherence and time stretching. The theory argues decoherence isn't just a quantum physics term, it's something we feel. It's the loss of phase alignment between our internal biological clocks, heart rate, neural firing, metabolic rate, and the external clock, the lattice's frame rate.
Right. And it's really crucial to grasp what the sources mean by time stretching here. It doesn't necessarily mean space-time itself is warping in the big Einsteinian gravitational sense.
Yeah.
It means your subjective experience of time stretches or compresses.
Oh.
When the internal clocks that render your moment-to-moment reality desynchronize from the external rhythm, your personal frame rate effectively drops. Imagine your brain normally processes reality at, say, the equivalent of 60 frames per second, giving you a smooth perception. If stress or illness or maybe EM noise causes decoherence,
Your frame rate drops.
maybe it drops to 12 frames per second. Subjectively, the world might seem to be moving in slow motion or feel choppy, disconnected. This loss of coherence, this drop in bandwidth, makes the system feel slower, more rigid, more predictable. It effectively ages your perception. Fewer possibilities seem available, the future feels more constrained. This is functionally what chronic stress does. It degrades your processing bandwidth.
I think I've definitely felt that sense of wading through treacle when you're exhausted or overwhelmed.
Okay, this leads to a really profound potential reframing. Mental health as fundamentally a phase problem. If our mind-body system is this complex, resonant, biological lattice constantly trying to sync with the universal lattice, then maybe most mental health conditions aren't just localized chemical imbalances, but are actually issues of timing, coherence, and phase relationships within this biological network.
That's a core assertion in these sources. They attempt to translate various conditions into the language of signal processing, information flow, and phase coherence.
Okay, let's look at some examples they give. What about conditions often defined by high velocity, maybe information overload, like ADHD or certain autism spectrum presentations?
These are described potentially as having ultra-high sampling rates. The individual's nervous system, their local biological antenna, is refreshing sensory frames much faster than the standard human social or linguistic compression layers can typically encode or process.
So the world feels too slow for them. Exactly. Their internal input rate is incredibly high, but the external world, especially social interaction, which relies on slower symbolic exchange, seems to lag behind. This results in a kind of internal bandwidth flood. Imagine trying to run a very simple, slow 2D program on a supercomputer. The processor is constantly starved for input that matches its speed, leading to restlessness or difficulty filtering the signal from the noise.
Wow. Okay. What about something like bipolarity, with those extreme swings between high-energy manic states and deep depressive states?
This is viewed through the lens of oscillation instability. Remember the ternary states. Resonance, +1, expansion, energy, and Rott, convention, decay, entropy, with Null as the stable midpoint. Bipolarity could be seen as the biological system failing to maintain that stable null state, that equilibrium.
So it swings wildly between the poles.
Instead of smoothly oscillating around the 0 point, the polarity of the internal electromagnetic charge distribution, or maybe the phase coherence, alternates dramatically. The system can't find homeostasis. This leads to those extreme subjective swings in perceived energy, reality perception, and available bandwidth. A failure of the system's internal governor.
And trauma. We talked about the forced keyframe. It seems like the most damaging condition in terms of timeline integrity.
Yes, because trauma is described as causing a profound, persistent phase misalignment. As we discussed, it creates that forced keyframe, a moment written into the system architecture. Neural pathways, maybe epigenetic changes in DNA resonance, under extreme duress, because it was written out of phase or without proper context.
They can't interpolate smoothly with the present.
Exactly. The nervous system gets stuck, constantly trying to reconcile these past corrupted keyframes with the present moment's projections. This results in that persistent feeling of living in a compromised, fragmented reality, where the past continually intrudes on the present through flashbacks, hypervigilance, or emotional dysregulation. The timeline file is corrupted.
But what's fascinating and hopeful is the idea of the body's own self-correction protocol. We often pathologize behaviors that, according to this theory, are actually the system intelligently trying to fix its own phase alignment, trying to reboot itself.
This is one of the most powerful and potentially therapeutic insights here. Behaviors that might seem manic or counterintuitive, like someone spontaneously singing loudly, rocking back and forth rhythmically, needing to dance intensely, or even laughing hysterically while feeling deep sadness. These aren't necessarily just symptoms of dysregulation.
They're the fix.
They could be the nervous system's innate natural resonance algorithm attempting to re-entrain itself. The body intuitively understands the physics involved. Motion plus rhythm plus sound, phase alignment. The person is subconsciously acting as their own tuning fork, using rhythmic vocalization, repetitive movement, breath patterns to try and retune a chaotic or desynchronized internal field.
And maybe society, or even therapy sometimes, tries to suppress that very behavior. Labels the synchronization attempt as just another symptom.
That's the danger highlighted. We might be shutting down the system's own robust attempt at self-repair because it looks strange or inappropriate. The body is trying to defragment its hard drive, essentially.
So the body has its own kind of bootloader sequence, a fundamental process for achieving coherence after a system crash or desynchronization. What's the core triad required for that reboot, according to this?
The nervous system seems to require a specific sequence, a triad of conditions, to successfully reboot and relock its phase coherence.
Okay, what's first?
1. Safety. The system needs to feel fundamentally safe. This involves activating the vagus nerve's ventral pathway, down-regulating the fight-or-flight threat response. It signals that the machine is secure enough to unlock and begin the update process. You can't defrag while the virus scan is running.
Makes sense. Step 2.
2. Reassurance. Once safety is established, the system needs to be soothed. This down-modulates the immediate threat assessment circuits, giving the system the necessary stability to stop constantly scanning for danger and discarding new, potentially positive data. It needs to feel stable enough to receive the update.
And the final step.
3. Rhythm. Once safe and reassured, the system needs rhythm to actually resynchronize. This phase locks the various internal timing networks, heart, breath, brain waves, potentially through conscious rhythmic breathing, gentle repetitive movement, humming, chanting, or even external rhythmic input like music or drumming.
Safety, reassurance, rhythm. That's the fundamental formula for biological recalibration. Moving the system out of a stuck state of Rott or chaotic resonance back towards the balance of null or coherent resonance.
That's the proposed biological pathway back to coherence. It respects the body's innate intelligence as a resonant system.
Okay, this brings us almost full circle. We started with ancient myth, and now we land on the most cutting-edge physics and computation. It seems like today's advanced tech is, in a way, a highly complex technological rediscovery of the same principles the Norse might have encoded in stone runes centuries ago.
It's a stunning convergence. Let's look at modern runes. Topological quantum computing. This is a really advanced and still somewhat theoretical area of quantum computing.
How is it different from regular quantum computing?
Standard quantum computing using qubits is incredibly powerful, but also incredibly fragile. Qubits rely on delicate quantum superposition states, which are easily disrupted by environmental noise, by heat, by vibration, basically by rot. Decoherence is the enemy.
So we're back to that fundamental problem, entropy corrupting the signal, information decaying.
Exactly. Topological quantum computing tries to solve this differently. It uses qubits based on the topology, the fundamental shape or structure of certain quantum states, rather than just their local properties. Think of quasi-particles like Majorana zero modes, sometimes called angel particles or ghost particles.
How does topology help?
Because topological properties are inherently robust. Think about tying a knot in a piece of string. You can wiggle the string all you want, local noise, but the knot itself, the topology, remains unless you actively cut the string or untie it. A topological qubit encodes information in these robust, non-local patterns woven into the quantum field itself.
So it's like a physical math version of a Norse rune, a pattern locked into the fabric of reality that resists noise.
That's the analogy the sources draw. It's an engineered stability. The goal is the same. Lock a pattern, an informational state, into the quantum field, into the lattice, in such a way that random fluctuations, Rott, can't easily scramble it.
So the engineers at Google or Microsoft trying to build stable topological qubits,
Yeah.
are they, without knowing it, performing a kind of high-tech runic magic? trying to carve stable symbols into the quantum foam?
If you strip away the layers of complex physics and engineering,
Yeah.
functionally, yes. Both ancient rune masters and modern quantum engineers are grappling with the same fundamental challenge. How do you write durable, stable information into the turbulent sea of probability, the null state, without it immediately unwriting itself through entropic decay?
And the ultimate goal, perhaps, as the sources suggest, creating a cosmic RAID array for consciousness.
Meaning a stable, perhaps non-locally stored imprint of individual identity, of consciousness, that resists informational corruption, resists rot. Something that could potentially allow continuity of awareness across keyframes, across disruptions, maybe even across biological death, achieving informational immortality.
Whoa. Okay. But the very capability of manipulating information at this truly fundamental depth, reading the lattice, stabilizing consciousness patterns, maybe even writing keyframes directly, this enters a hugely sensitive ethical red zone.
Absolutely. The potential for misuse is staggering. If you can truly read and write at the level of the lattice, or interface directly with the bioresonant fields that anchor consciousness, we're talking about possibilities like unconsented behavioral mapping and prediction on a massive scale.
Or accessing the collective consciousness field.
Or even theoretically rewriting individual past keyframes or future probabilities without consent, influencing wired directly. The danger, as always, isn't inherent in the physics itself. The principles of the lattice are neutral. The danger lies in its deployment by flawed human systems, by power structures prone to control and coercion.
So, given this immense power, what are the essential guardrails needed? According to this unified theory, what do we absolutely need to insist upon to prevent this high-fidelity access from leading to some kind of ultimate totalitarian system based on prediction and control, ultimate rot?
Two principles are paramount, echoing perhaps the intent needed for true rune work: transparency and agency.
Explain those in this context.
Transparency means that any system interacting with our biological or conscious fields must be completely open about what it's measuring, what it's tracking, what algorithms are running. No hidden metrics, no black box operations, no subliminal phasing signals designed to influence us below awareness. We need to know how the system sees us.
And agency.
Agency means the fundamental, inalienable right for an individual to opt out, to shield their signal, or crucially, to consciously alter their own signal. The right to write your own keyframes, to choose your own path within the probability space without external interference overriding your intent. The ancient Norse, the stories say, understood the importance of fidelity, of pure intent when carving runes because misuse could energetically corrupt the wielder as much as the target.
So, modern engineers are carving their stability symbols using advanced physics, but we face the exact same ethical challenge. How do you work with the weave of reality without collapsing the whole system into total enforced control, preventing the pursuit of perfect resonance from becoming its opposite, rot?
That is the tightrope walk, yes. Balancing order and freedom at the most fundamental level of reality.
This deep dive, wow, it's shown us something pretty profound, I think. That the most complex, mind-bending concepts in modern quantum physics and information theory, decoherence, entanglement, field theory, the observer effect, maybe they weren't discovered recently in labs. Maybe they were simply described, intuitively understood, by ancient people thousands of years ago, using the language they had. Stories of gods, monsters, world trees, and magical rainbow bridges.
They successfully encoded the operations of the universe into myth, into symbol. This unified theory, ambitious as it is, gives us a potentially breathtakingly coherent map, bridging that mythological deep past with our accelerating computational future. It suggests a continuum of knowledge, not a rupture.
And the core implication, it's that we aren't just passive observers watching a cosmic movie.
Not at all. The unified theory suggests that we are, ourselves, dynamic code. Patterns of energy and information, fields of radiation printed here in projected foreplay, as one source poetically puts it. With our DNA and our synchronized nervous system acting as the local rendering hardware, the antenna tuning into the lattice.
So we are actively contributing to the film.
We're contributing to its frame rate, through our coherence and to its content, through our choices, our focus, our intent. Every conscious, coherent choice we make, every feeling we genuinely embody, potentially writes a new keyframe into the lattice, influencing the interpolation, the unfolding reality that follows. We are co-authors of the cosmic script.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Here's a final thought to take away from this deep dive. If emotional trauma, as this theory suggests, creates a forced keyframe, a corrupted data point that disrupts your timeline's smooth interpolation, What deliberate, rhythmic, coherent act could you choose to do today? Maybe it's singing, maybe it's dancing, maybe it's just quiet, focused breath work, maybe it's precise mindful action. What could you do to consciously attempt to correct your own biological checksum, to retune your phase alignment, and integrate a new, coherent, resonant keyframe into the unfolding story of your life?
Something to think about.
Thank you for diving deep with us.